Most businesses only focus on growing and expanding, and they give little to no attention to their exit strategies until after exit is staring them in the face. Learn here at Boosting Business Value, brought to you by Blue Sky Business Resources. You'll discover how to shape a more durable and saleable business, and how to implement a powerful, well-planned, and rewarding exit. Join Dr. David Gruder and Jason Tazinkowicz as they deliver actionable tips for lower middle market company owners, executives, and their trusted advisors. Find out where your business currently stands, how you can meet your revenue objectives more reliably, and how to grow your venture to the next level, all with a smooth and fruitful exit in mind. Here are your hosts, Dr. David and Jason.
Welcome back. As you know, for those of you who have been listening to us for a while, at Boosting Business Value, we do not spend a lot of time talking about Blue Sky Business Resources, who we are and what we provide. We hope that the information that we provide is valuable enough that you'll want to get to know us on your own. However, we realize that as a service to our listeners, it's appropriate that we point out that we're one of the very few, if not the only investment bank that has an organizational development psychologist on our team. And we think that it's very important that you understand why that is valuable to our firm, but also to you as a business owner. For those of you who are new to Boosting Business Value, I'm Jason Tazinkowicz. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Blue Sky Business Resources. And with me, as always, is my foil, my friend, and my partner in crime, Dr. David Gruder. He is Blue Sky's business lifecycle, exit planning, and post-acquisition psychologist. David, take it away.
Thank you. And just as a footnote, I think this episode is really valuable also for private equity firms and investment banks to know about. And why don't we jump straight into what the big challenges and solutions are related to the kinds of issues that virtually every business has that they don't usually realize an organizational development psychologist is their best solution to.
Really appreciate you bringing that up, David. Let's start out with the hardest one. Leaders hate to admit, and I'm guilty of this too, I think we all are, hate to admit that we have significant gaps in our leadership skills. And as an executive team, our collaborative effectiveness could be enhanced by focusing on and raising the awareness of the gaps that we have and allowing ourselves to learn and grow in communication as well as leadership skills. This will help us move to the next phase, especially, going back to previous episodes of our meaningful inflection points, a better understanding of ourselves as leaders and how we behave and how we act together as a team can really accelerate those next level transitions.
Yeah, well said and connected or very connected with what you were just saying. We leaders often also hate to admit that we haven't been sufficiently trained in dimensions of business that relate to the psychological aspects of effective business, including sequencing effectiveness. A lot of leaders are so much in the visionary mindset that they find it hard to shift into strategy, let alone into tactics. And if they shift into tactics, the question of what to do in what order, that's sequencing effectiveness, tends to be a missing skill set. It's not your fault if you don't know how to do that well. It's really simply a skill that is undertrained.
So true. And to just piggyback on that, we learn a lot in our experiential world as leaders as we grow up through experience. But also, if we go through an educational path, we learn a lot about tactics. We learn a lot about metrics. We learn a lot about the hard elements of running a business. But this idea of crafting and implementing a high performance, high collaboration, high happiness culture, that's pretty soft for an educational system. And it's not usually something that we strive to go out and get educated on when we're busy with the hard and fast day-to-day of running a business. We're under-trained and under-educated. A lot of these soft skills that make culture exceptional. And it's largely by chance and by luck that we end up with some great leaders that have this innate ability. But for the rest of us, getting help and getting training and coaching in this could be extremely as valuable as getting training and coaching on running the numbers.
Really well said. Absolutely so. And this whole thing of soft skills is in businesses, there's often an acknowledgement of the importance of soft skills, especially these days. There's more and more awareness of that, but not a corresponding level of efficacy or effectiveness in translating those intentions into step-by-step procedures for implementation. That's where the value and the wisdom of an organizational development psychologist comes in, because the good ones know how to translate soft skills into hardcore procedures, hardcore implementation processes. And I think along with that, another not fully connected dimension to this that's just as important is that you and I, Jason, often see, probably most often see, that business owners imagine that they're exit ready before they and the business actually are exit ready. And a lot of that is because of not knowing how to run the numbers, that's for sure. Another part of that is not knowing how to assess the people pieces for exit readiness as well.
So true. As an investment bank, we deal with M&A transactions. That's our bread and butter, right? And 87% of M&A transactions that fail because of intentional or unintentional sabotage by the selling party. Because when you first think about selling your business, you think about a transaction. We sell stuff all the time. That's what we do. It's so easy. We'll just go sell something. But then you get into it and you start to realize that this is the most financially and psychologically fraught experience in a business founder's life that can sneak up on a person if you're not preparing for it. And that's when these transactions end up being sabotaged by a unemotionally prepared business founder.
Absolutely. And the thing that I would add about that is virtually every M&A firm knows this, but very few have the expertise on board to do something about it on the psychological level of what creates these M&A dramas. And then there's post-exit. There are two aspects of post-exit, whether it's through succession or acquisition. One has to do with the owner having a next chapter in their life after exiting the business that they're on fire about living into. And a lot of business owners don't have that, or they have it in mind in some kind of vague, fuzzy intention level way, but not in the brass tacks, how am I going to implement it kind of way. And then there's also in post-exit, the issue of the new acquirer or the new CEO is how are they going to integrate into this company? How are they going to work with the existing personnel and the existing culture and the things that made the company acquisition worthy in the first place without tinkering with the company in ways that actually turn it into something that isn't as profitable as what they were buying because they're so intent on putting their own stamp on the company without the psychological savvy to determine what parts of the stamp do they want to put on the company that are actually going to help it elevate to the next level versus turn it into something that's different from what made it successful in the first place.
Great points. And the other part of this is there are a whole lot of other people involved between other than just the seller and the new CEO. This trickles through the entire company culture. And one of those things, if you are one of those, I guess, emotionally enlightened, high EQ leaders, and you develop a culture that is strong and communicative and open, that culture is going to be more resilient and come together better in this post-acquisition phase and will be able to guide that new CEO into welcoming the opportunities to put an appropriate stamp on making the business better and valuable. So I love that point. And then the last one, this one's the big elephant in the room, the double stigma. This is a double whammy for the ego. Not only are we saying business leaders, business owners, you need to ask for help. A lot of business owners and leaders are starting to get to the point where they're getting comfortable with help, but it's still a stigmatized thing for leadership. But then you add on top of that, you need to get help from a shrink. And there's so much stigma behind all of that, that I think we'd all rather rub some dirt on it and walk it off. And the more we can open ourselves up to the idea that talking to a psychologist doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean you're weak. It actually means that you're strong enough to get the same type of training for these soft emotional skills as you would for the hard technical stuff. And I think that's something that as a society, we've made this a bad thing for no good reason.
Well, absolutely true. And my piggyback on that is that I think that's related to a misnomer that a lot of people have, that when they think about a psychologist, they only think about psychotherapy. But psychologists who are properly trained can do a whole lot more than just psychotherapy. And just because a business needs an organizational development psychologist, that doesn't necessarily mean, it most often doesn't mean that psychotherapy is what's needed.
I'm glad you said that, but I still spend a lot of time on your couch. As we're digesting and mulling on these issues that are challenges to getting engaged with an organizational psychologist, what is it, Dr. Gruder, that we should be looking for?
Yeah, that's absolutely where we need to go next. And in unpacking what to look for, the first thing that I think is important for our viewers and listeners to be aware of is that there's bifurcation in my field in the first place, where you have people who are trained to be psychotherapists, and you have psychologists who are trained in organizational development or in IO, industrial organizational psychology, and very few are trained in both clinical psychology and organizational development psychology. And so the wisdom that clinical psychologists can offer is massive because they have the deep dive understanding of psychological dynamics inside of individuals and between individuals. That's really valuable. But if they don't know how those principles impact a business and how to intervene in a non-psychotherapeutic way in a business to help the culture elevate itself and the leaders elevate themselves, then their clinical psychology wisdom is of very limited value. On the other side of it, there are organizational development and IO psychologists that understand things about organizational dynamics and about testing, which is the IO, industrial organizational realm, but they don't have a depth of clinical knowledge that really can take into account those internal and interpersonal psychological dynamics. And I was blessed with getting my doctorate in both clinical psychology and organizational development psychology. And for the first 20 years of my career, I was doing both. In the more recent decades of my career, I stopped providing psychotherapy because the amount of time that I was out of town providing training and keynotes and consulting made it impossible for me to be consistently available to psychotherapy clients. But I'm still drawing from decades of wisdom and experience on top of my training in clinical psychology. The first part of what to look for is look for a psychologist who's ambidextrous, who is equally endowed with clinical psychology wisdom and organizational development psychology wisdom.
That's amazing. And if you can't find a Dr. David Gruder because you're, one in a gazillion, is it reasonable to look for a well-balanced team, one of each coming as a package deal?
Well, it's reasonable to attempt to find that. And the needle in that haystack is if there is a team of both, they have to be exquisite in their collaboration with each other in order to be useful. And on top of that, generally the cost of having two psychologists is a little higher than the cost of having one.
Lucky for our listeners, we've got you. But before we even get into this, I feel like there's this phase that preempts getting engaged with a psychologist, which is getting yourself and your team prepared for having this work done. You have to have an openness and a willingness and an ability to be trained and educated in this way before you can sign up. Is that correct?
Not only is it correct, but it reminds me of one of my favorite light bulb jokes. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb?
Tell me, doctor.
Only one, but the light bulb has to really want to change.
Classic.
And your point about readiness is spot on. And then it's also, in terms of what to look for, it's really crucial to understand what your journey with a business lifecycle organizational development psychologist is going to look like, because there are a number of components to that journey. And the first of those components is inspiration and motivation, getting people excited about elevating their EQ, their collaboration effectiveness, their leader effectiveness, their culture, their next chapter plans, if they're the owner, things like that, getting them inspired and motivated. And the problem with that so many businesses have run into, especially in prior decades, is that they would spend massive amounts of money to bring in an inspirational, motivational speaker. And if they were fortunate enough to get a really good one, then their team would respond to that speaker with a lot of motivation and inspiration that disappeared into the ethers within 48 hours, that it didn't translate into changed behavior. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses got sour on psychologists in business because they didn't realize that inspiration and motivation is only the first step in a multi-step journey. It's not sufficient by itself, even though it's got value. And then once people are inspired and motivated, then comes appraisal, taking a look at what's working well and why it's working well, and what the even better ifs are, how things could work even better with leadership capabilities and culture functioning and collaboration and problem solving and conflict resolution, and the list goes on in terms of appraisal. Then from there, based on the appraisal, then you get a business life cycle phase matched strategy. And what I mean by phase matched is that the ways in which a psychologist can be useful to a business is those ways are different depending on which phase a business is in. The way a psychologist can be helpful during, if we go back to the 3 inflection points, the way a psychologist can be helpful during the innovation phase is different than during the fruition phase, which is again different from during the bifurcation phase. If you have business psychologist on board who doesn't understand what is the most useful thing to focus on, given the stage that the business is at in its development, their wisdom is not going to be as useful as it ought to be and it can be. That's at the strategic level after appraisal. And then after that comes a tactical plan. Once you're clear about the strategy, that's phase matched to where the business is in its life cycle, then you have some decisions to make around tactics that are going to implement the strategy. And in order to implement those tactics, often there are skills upgrades and or procedure upgrades that need to be installed. Skills and procedures development come after tactical planning. And then after skills and procedures development comes consistent, masterful utilization of those skills and procedures. Here's another trap that's common these days. A lot of businesses have gotten, like I said earlier, or they've gotten over the inspiration motivation trap. They'll bring in someone to give their team training in new skills and new procedures. And if that psychologist is really good at that, and that's where it stops, that money gets wasted too, because it's useless to be trained in elevated skills and procedures unless they're going to become embedded in the day-to-day operations of the culture of the business. Consistent, masterful utilization of those skills and procedures that the team receives training in comes next. And then ultimately, when you have an effective process along the lines of what I've just been describing, you would want in your business an internal expert designated. So someone in the business who's trained in being able to continue the continuous improvement, the Kaizen of the psychological dimensions of business success after that external psychologist consultant has finished doing their magic.
I love it. And there's so many good points in there, but the two that come up to me most are, one, the drum that I'm always beating, which is you see all these dramatic makeover shows and everybody thinks that you can just have a makeover and be changed. But if the underlying behaviors aren't worked on as well, you're going to backslide. It's inevitable. I love this practice-based approach to helping people elevate their culture through behavior. That's really great. And then, of course, when you brought up the motivational speakers, I got to thinking about Chris Farley, and I miss that guy.
Me too. In his van down by the river.
That's the one.
Indeed. Some of you may not remember that classic earlier years Saturday Night Live skit, but motivational speaker who...
It's worth a YouTube, I'd say that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Anything else you want to say about what we've been discussing before we get into key takeaways?
No, you've covered it so eloquently.
Oh, well, okay. Why don't you take it away with some of the key takeaways for you?
Yeah, the first one is, I think it's the big one, right? Get over these stigmas. Asking for help and talking to a psychologist is valuable in a way that you're not going to get anywhere else. This isn't the type of stuff that you can just stumble into unless, again, you're somebody with an unnaturally high emotional intelligence to begin with. But the other thing is just this, spread the word, share the awareness. These business lifecycle and organizational psychologists do exist. You're not a unicorn. You're rare, but not a unicorn. And you exist for a reason. The biggest 3 underutilized reasons that I got out of this are that, again, they're rare, but worth sourcing out, that there is this stigma. And so people aren't looking for you in the way that they should or engaging in the way that would be valuable. And few businesses and executives really appreciate this soft side of how it can elevate everything that you do. And I see some companies coming around to this. I see companies starting to realize that if you focus on the people, your bottom line improves better than if you focus on the bottom line. It's still rare. It's still unique. And this is the type of thing that I think is really powerful and why we wanted to make this podcast in the first place.
Yeah, incredibly well said. And this ties in with the takeaway that I want to most emphasize, which is related to how painful it is for me to see businesses and their leadership and their culture suffer because they don't have access to professionals like me. They know that there are psychological dimensions to be addressed. They know that soft skills are important, but they don't know who to look to turn those soft skills into hardcore training, hardcore procedures, hardcore implementation. And it's a kind of suffering and pain in a business that is avoidable and needless, except for the fact that what you were saying about stigma and also about not knowing the wealth, the range of contribution and helpfulness that a psychologist who's equally endowed on the clinical end and the organizational development end of psychology can bring to a business's success. And then the final takeaway for me is about overcoming the stigmas. As I said earlier, the starting place for overcoming those stigmas is stop thinking of psychology as only psychotherapy. It is not only psychotherapy, and it has so much more beyond psychotherapy to offer to businesses, to governments, to international relations, to all levels of society and humanity beyond psychotherapy. And it's really a crime that competent psychologists aren't being used far more extensively in business and in governance.
It's true. You might have a branding problem there.
Should we devote a future episode to that?
Oh, boy.
For sure, that's true. Any final comments before we wrap this up?
I'm good. Thank you.
Well, then, on behalf of you, Jason Tuzinkowicz, and myself, we thank you once again for listening to this particular episode. And we want to once again remind you to click the subscribe button so you can be notified immediately when we release future episodes. And we are always looking forward to reading your thoughts and questions and topic suggestions and other requests in the comments section at the bottom of each episode's page. And all of the episode pages are available through blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. Or if you just go to blueskyadvisors.net, in the top menu, you'll see a podcast option there too. And lastly, we want to invite you to take advantage of Blue Sky's free surveys for gauging your business health more accurately. These are incredibly potent surveys, that each of which takes only a few minutes to complete. And yet, even though they're not time-consuming to complete, what you get as part of completing the survey at no cost is real-time feedback and recommendations. In my opinion, it would really be foolhardy to not invest that small amount of time in order to get that massive value. Don't be deceived by the fact that these are free, because frankly, other firms will charge and do charge big bucks for some of these kinds of assessments. Blue Sky makes those available at no charge. And in order to get started with those, just go to blueskyadvisors.net.
That's all for this episode of Boosting Business Value. May your new learning result in the smoothest and most profitable exit strategy for your business. With the right knowledge and guidance, the sky's the limit to what you can do. Do not miss an episode by subscribing to the show. And if you want to learn where your business currently stands, we also have free key opportunity assessments. Find all of them at blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.